Welcome to Adventures in Accessibility, a podcast that explores the far reaches of disability, access, and inclusion, with your host, Dana Barton.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Adventures in Accessibility. Today I'm talking with Senator Tammy Duckworth from Illinois. Senator Duckworth is an Iraq War veteran and Purple Heart recipient. She was the former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. She was the first disabled woman elected into Congress in 2012, and in 2016, she was elected to the U.S. Senate, where she was the first female disabled senator. In addition, she became the first female senator to give birth while in office. In addition to the many issues for which Senator Duckworth fights, she's a strong supporter of civil rights for all Americans and is committed to advancing policies to protect Americans in all areas of society. Recently, she took on Amtrak after the transportation company sought to charge two passengers an extortionate amount of money to accommodate their wheelchairs on a one-way train ride. She also backed the Air Carrier Access Amendments Act, which included many disability-focused provisions on the Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Act. Her major contribution was a new rule requiring airlines to report information on the number of checked bags, wheelchairs, and motorized scooters they damage each month. As we approach the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, we are honored to spend time with Senator Duckworth on today's special episode. Hi, Senator Duckworth. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes of your time. I know you're a very busy woman. We wanted to talk to you a bit about the Americans with Disabilities Act and kind of your role as a senator working with the ADA. So if we could start, could you tell me about how you became familiar with the ADA?
Well, I think that most of us are familiar with the ADA throughout life just from growing up and having access to your local supermarket, and you see the handicapped parking spots and all of that, but we don't really think about it, folks in the, general community until you yourself suffer some sort of a disability.
Yeah. And so you have a disability. Can you tell our listeners who might not be familiar a little bit about that?
Sure. I was a helicopter pilot in the war in Iraq, and as a result of my service, I was wounded, and I ended up with a double amputation of my legs, and I also have reduced function of my right arm.
Okay. How did your views of the ADA change after that happened?
Well, I will say that probably prior to that, in many ways, the ADA almost seemed like I never thought about it, or in some cases, it was a nuisance. I think that's the way most Americans view the ADA. They either never think of it and they take for granted the curb cuts as they're taking their shopping carts to the parking lot, or they never think of it when they get to use the elevator. But then they may think of it as a nuisance when you're a business owner, for example, because now you have to meet with the ADA law. And then one day you find yourself, with a busted knee or a broken ankle, and you need all of the access that the ADA grants, and you realize, how important of a piece of legislation that it truly is.
Absolutely. Well, we're coming up this summer, as you know, on the 30th anniversary of the ADA. What does the 30th anniversary mean to you?
Well, for me, the 30th anniversary should be a redoubling of our efforts to fully implement it. I can't believe that 30 years later, we still have not implemented the ADA. I'll give you an example. I was given a tour of the Chicago Transit Authority's elevated train system recently, the L. And they were very proud to take me out there to show me, this new station that they had that was now fully accessible, and that they were planning on becoming fully accessible within the next 20 years. And I said, so basically it's going to take you a half century to become ADA compliant. That's not something to be proud of. Why are you not compliant now? The ADA has been law for 3 decades. And so for me, at the 30-year anniversary just tells me how much further we really have to go. I just downloaded an app on my phone that tracks where all of the accessible, that tracks where accessible bathrooms are all around the world, and it's a crowdfunding app. It's like, why am I needing to do this in this country where my daughter had her elementary school kindergarten orientation, and they took the kids on a bus ride. Guess what? I couldn't get on the bus with her.
Wow.
Because it wasn't accessible. So they're like, oh, we will have a special bus if you request it. Like, no, they should all be accessible.
Right.
Why is it at 30 years we're still dealing with all of this now? This is not acceptable, and we need to do more.
What is happening in D.C. Around the ADA and, I guess, enforcement of a 30-year-old law?
Well, what's happening is that corporate interests are trying to actually erode away the ADA, and they have actually just last year very successfully convinced a lot of legislators that we need to gut the ADA because of nuisance lawsuits. It's completely untrue, and you don't actually get cash awards for somebody who violates the ADA, but you have shopping malls and restaurants and hotel associations who don't want to comply with ADA, who have, been backing an effort to actually undermine and gut the ADA. So we're in a renewed fight, actually, just for the ADA that was passed 30 years ago, let alone the need to strengthen it.
Yeah. So finally, what can our listeners do to support full implementation of the ADA? What would your advice to them be?
I think to very politely and firmly let the all of the public spaces know when they're not ADA compliant. When you go into a restaurant, when you go into an establishment and it's not ADA compliant, even if you're not using a wheelchair yourself or whatever the issue is, you need to say, hey, you're not ADA compliant, and then really hold people to this effort, because until people demand action, businesses who get away with it will just continue to shirk their responsibility, and that actually in itself weakens the law.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. Again, I know you're busy, but you're such a strong advocate for the ADA, and we appreciate all that you're doing to see it come to full implementation. Thank you for joining us today on our special episode of Adventures in Accessibility.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Adventures in Accessibility. Tune in next time for another dive into the unknown.
Adventures in Accessibility is hosted by Dana Barton, produced by Emily Schumann, and Mike Shea is our sound engineer. This podcast is a project of the Rocky Mountain ADA Center and is funded under a grant from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. Grant number 90DP0094-01-00. This production is intended solely for entertainment and informal guidance and should not be considered legal advice. The opinions expressed by guests are not necessarily held or endorsed by the Rocky Mountain ADA Center.